You know, some battles are just footnotes in history. And then there are the earthquakes. The ones that don't just decide a winner and a loser, but completely shatter the foundations of an era. Well, in 1738, at a legendary mountain pass, one of those earthquakes happened. It wasn't just a victory, it was like the cracking of a seal on the Indian subcontinent, and it unleashed forces that would redraw the map for centuries. So let's dive into how this single battle completely changed the destiny of a subcontinent. At the very heart of this story is one of history's most terrifyingly brilliant military commanders, Nader Shah of Persia. Now, this guy wasn't born into royalty. His father was a shepherd, of all things. But through just sheer force of will, tactical genius, and a relentless ambition, he forged a brand new Persian empire from the ashes of a civil war. He was a force of nature, and his gaze was now fixed on the vast, legendary wealth of his neighbor, the Mughal Empire. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to ask, how on earth did a mighty empire become so fragile? Who was this invader at the gates? We'll look at the impossible march that broke through an unbreakable defense. Then we'll follow that road to ruin and witness the great unraveling that followed, and really get to the bottom of the lasting legacy of this one pivotal battle. All right, so to really get how one single battle could have such a devastating impact, we first have to look at the state of the Mughal Empire back in 1738. And to put it mildly, it was a shadow of its former self. Now, what's so fascinating about this is the contrast. It's night and day. The Mughal Empire of the past, under emperors like Akbar, was an absolute powerhouse. It had centralized authority, military innovation, its armies were feared all across Asia. But by the time we get to Emperor Muhammad Shah, the empire was just rotting from the inside out. The court was obsessed with infighting, the rulers were weak, and the military, the very thing that held the empire together, was in a state of serious decay. And this is just how deep the rot went. The emperor and his nobles, far more interested in the luxuries of court life than actually governing. You had military officers committing massive fraud, claiming salaries for phantom troops that didn't even exist just to line their own pockets. The army was still stuck on outdated cavalry tactics, totally ignoring the gunpowder revolution that Nader had perfected. And when the governors on the frontier were practically begging for money and troops to face the threat they saw coming, their warnings, well, they were just ignored. So, while the Mughal Empire was withering away, a new, terrifyingly efficient military machine was being built right next door, and this was the Persia of Nader Shah. Nader's army was the polar opposite of the Mughal force. We're talking about a professional, disciplined, and battle-hardened behemoth. Nader had modernized his entire military, focusing on superior firepower with his musketeers and his highly mobile artillery. His troops were veterans of constant, brutal campaigns. They were loyal, they were lethal, and they were marching right towards India's doorstep. Okay, so you gotta understand, for Nader to reach the incredible riches of India, he had to go through one place, the Khyber Pass. For thousands of years, this narrow, treacherous 50-kilometer passage through the mountains was the main artery for everything: trade, culture, and yes, invasion. From Mahmud of Ghazni to Babur, the founder of the Mughal dynasty himself, every great conqueror from Central Asia had to come through here. It was the gate, and blocking it was the Mughal Empire's only real hope. And this is where things get really interesting. It sets the stage for the battle itself. The Mughals held what everybody thought was an unbreachable position. And what Nader did next, well, it's still studied today as an absolute masterclass in military strategy. Let's just pause on this for a second, because this was the puzzle facing Nader Shah. A frontal assault? That would be suicide. The narrow pass would just funnel his troops into a kill zone, where the defenders could pick them off from the high ground. It would be a bloody mess that could break his army, even if he won. So, what was his solution? So, here's the matchup. The Mughal governor, Nasser Khan, had pulled together about 20,000 local Afghan tribesmen. They weren't exactly an elite force, but they had one huge advantage: the terrain. They were dug in, blocking the pass. Nader's army was a bit bigger, sure, but he couldn't bring all his forces to bear in that narrow space. His advantage was in the quality of his troops, and, most importantly, in his own strategic brilliance. He wasn't about to play by their rules. Nader's plan was just audacious. It was as simple as it was brilliant. He left most of his army under his son's command and told them to make a huge show of preparing for a frontal assault to keep all the defenders' eyes looking straight ahead. Meanwhile, with a local guide who knew the area, Nader personally took 10,000 of his best cavalry on a secret path through the mountains, a route everyone thought was impassable. The goal? To pop up as if from nowhere, directly behind the enemy. 80 kilometers. Just let that number sink in for a moment. Not on a paved road, but on a treacherous mountain track in the freezing cold, crossing ridges hundreds of feet above a deadly drop. He pushed his elite troops to their absolute limit, completing this insane flank march in about a day. It was a feat of endurance that was just unthinkable to his enemies. And as the sun came up on November 26, 1738, Nader's exhausted cavalry appeared out of the mountains directly in the rear of Nasir Khan's camp. The defenders, who had been staring at the decoy force in front of them, were caught completely, totally by surprise. The Persian charge was swift and it was brutal. The tribal levies, shocked and demoralized, just broke and ran. The battle was over almost before it even started. The keys to India had just been stolen. You see, the victory at Khyber Pass wasn't just a single defeat. It was like pulling a loose thread that caused the entire fabric of the Mughal defense to unravel with just breathtaking speed. This timeline just shows the catastrophic cascade that followed. With the gate wide open, there were no more natural barriers to stop Nader. Peshawar fell without a fight. His army crossed the mighty Indus River and just poured into the plains of Punjab. Lahore, a major capital, surrendered. And when the main Mughal imperial army finally met him at the Battle of Karnal, they were utterly crushed in just a few hours. Only 4 months after the Khyber Pass, Nader Shah was standing in the Mughal capital of Delhi. This quote from someone who was actually there at the Battle of Karnal, it says everything. Jazer was the heavy, long-range musket used by Nader's elite soldiers. What the witness is saying is that the Mughals' main weapon, the arrow, was useless against the superior firepower and discipline of the Persian army. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. The Khyber Pass exposed this weakness, and Karnal confirmed it in the most brutal way imaginable. The sack of Delhi was a horror, for sure. But the true, lasting impact of this whole invasion, it went far, far deeper than just one city. It fundamentally broke the political order of the entire subcontinent. What you're looking at here is the long-term result. Nader's invasion didn't just defeat the Mughal emperor, it shattered the very idea of his authority. And in the massive power vacuum that was created, new forces started to rise up. In the northwest, one of Nader's own commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, would use the chaos to create what becomes modern Afghanistan. In Punjab, the Sikh missiles began carving out their own territory. And in the heart of India, the Maratha Confederacy expanded its power, challenging and now helpless Delhi. So the final scorecard? It was devastating. The Mughals were forced to hand over all their lands west of the Indus. The loot taken from Delhi was staggering, including legendary treasures like the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. But more valuable than any jewel was the imperial prestige, which was just lost forever. The empire was exposed as a hollow shell. This just sped up its collapse, and this is critical. It paved the way for ambitious European powers, like the British and the French, to eventually move in. So why do we look back at this one battle, at this one mountain pass, nearly 300 years later? Well, because its lessons and its consequences are still with us. You know, this battle is like a masterclass in military strategy. It shows you the absolute importance of good intelligence. Nader won because he knew about a path the Mughals didn't. It shows the danger of relying too much on natural defenses, just assuming a fortress can't be taken. It proves that a smaller, better-trained, more innovative army can beat a larger, more traditional one. And maybe, most importantly, it shows how one single brilliant move can lead to a complete and total strategic collapse. When you boil it all down, the Battle of the Khyber Pass was so much more than a battle. It was a catalyst. It didn't just open a path for an army, it broke open an entire political ecosystem. The fall of the Mughals, the rise of regional powers like the Marathas and the Sikhs, the birth of modern Afghanistan, and the eventual colonization of India by Europeans, the seeds of all of it were planted in that freezing mountain pass in 1738. And that really leaves us with a final thought. We often think of history changing through long, drawn-out wars. But sometimes all it takes is one audacious plan, one impossible march, one brilliant moment that shatters the defenses and changes the course of an entire subcontinent. Forever.